On today's podcast, we have Trevor Millar, the Executive Director of the Canadian Psychedelic Association and Chair of the Board for MAPS Canada. We talk about the recent petition that the Canadian Psychedelic Association sent to the Canadian government to decriminalize all psychedelics. Welcome to the Third Wave Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Austin, here to bring you cutting-edge interviews with leading scientists, entrepreneurs, and medical professionals who are exploring how we can integrate psychedelics in an intentional and responsible way for both healing and transformation. It is my honor and privilege to bring you these episodes as you get deeper and deeper into why these medicines are so critical to the future of humanity. So let's go and let's see what we can explore and learn together in this incredibly important time. This podcast is brought to you by Sovereignty. They blend ancient Eastern plant medicine with highly functional, bioavailable cannabinoids. This is by far the best nootropic supplement that I've worked with in recent memory. You know, I've cycled through probably 12 to 15 different supplements specifically for sleep because I have a hard time winding down at night. And I also wear the Oura Ring, so it tests and measures my sleep quality. And since I started working with Dream, which is one of the two supplements that Sovereignty offers, my Oura Ring sleep score has increased consistently, and I've woken up feeling a lot more refreshed and ready to go. So they have two different supplements. One is Purpose. That's great for daytime alertness and focus, and it includes 7 plant-based ingredients. And what I just mentioned is Dream, which is meant for nighttime relaxation and rest, restorative and rejuvenating sleep with CBN. And not only my personal example, but Sovereignty tested it on hundreds of people with Oura Rings and found that 76% of people had improved sleep in some capacity. So if you're interested in finding out more about Sovereignty, for our listeners, they have your favorite money back guarantee. If you purchase Sovereignty supplements and you don't like it, and it's not the best supplement that you've ever had, they will not only replace your money, but they will also purchase your supplement of choice. So you can go and find out more information at sovereignty.co/third wave. That is SOVEREIGNTY.co/third wave. Third Wave's podcast is brought to you by Magic Mind, called Silicon Valley's new morning elixir by Forbes. Do you want more creativity, flow, and energy in your day-to-day routine? Then go to magicmind.co and get the 2-ounce shot that contains 12 magical ingredients scientifically designed to improve your productivity. I've been using Magic Mind over the last couple months to reduce my morning coffee, and it works like a charm. With matcha, lion's mane, and several other nootropics, it lifts you up and doesn't burn you out. So if you're interested in Magic Mind, go to magicmind.co and enter promo code THIRDWAVE to get 10% off your first order. Hey listeners, and welcome back to Third Wave's podcast. As always, I am your host, Paul Austin. Recording this from a nice little WeWork cubby in Wynwood, Miami. And in today's episode, we're diving deep into a recent petition that the Canadian Psychedelic Association was collecting signatures for. We recorded this probably back in April or May. And because I went on a recording spree in the immediate post-COVID era, some of our podcasts took a little bit to come out. So this one is with Trevor Millar, who's the executive director of the Canadian Psychedelic Association. And like I said, they have recently sent a petition into the Canadian government to decriminalize all psychedelics. It is supposed to be heard after September 23rd, within 45 days. So probably very soon, this petition will be heard. And it doesn't look like it will pass initially, but the petition has gathered enough signatures, at least, to be read in the House of Commons. And it's phenomenal just for the general education of the Canadian government to be hearing more and more about psychedelics. There was also a recent announcement from TheraSil, which is a nonprofit in Canada, that a handful of Canadians were granted exemptions to use psilocybin for end-of-life anxiety. So that's another significant step forward for the medical use of psychedelics, which is phenomenal. So in today's conversation with Trevor, we talk about the petition, we talk about his role and story with psychedelics. You know, Trevor used to be the executive director of the Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance, so he has a strong background in Iboga and Ibogaine. He is chair of the board for MAPS Canada, and now he is executive director of the Canadian Psychedelic Association, has a background as a social entrepreneur. And we just sort of weave in his personal story with the petition, what has motivated his work, and where, psychedelics currently stand in Canada. So this is a really interesting conversation. And without further ado, I bring you Trevor Millar, Executive Director of the Canadian Psychedelic Association. Where are you calling from?
From Vancouver.
Nice. Where in Vancouver?
Right in East Van, near Commercial Drive.
Okay, I don't know Vancouver that well, so
no, we're pretty close to downtown, like probably a 10-minute drive from downtown. I dare say it's the coolest neighborhood of Vancouver. It's got a little edge to it. Yeah, it's very ethnical, like a lot of Italian, Portuguese. They were kind of the original settlers here, and it's still kind of got a gritty vibe to it compared to a lot of Vancouver.
Did you just make up a word? Did you say ethnical? I think you said ethnical.
Did I say that? I think I meant to say ethnic, but
you said ethnical. Did Trevor just make that up? That's a great word. That's a really good word.
Yeah.
In 2016, I went to Vancouver.
Cool.
I spent most of my 20s backpacking around and lived, all over, and was there for a week and was couch surfing at the time.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And couch surfed with someone who owned a penthouse that overlooked English Bay or whatever.
Nice.
And it was just like I could go out there for sunsets, and it was a perfect location, and there was like a great cafe nearby, and I would walk to Granville Island, and then I was back earlier this year to hang out with Peyton and Stacy.
Nice, good.
And we had dinner with them and did a podcast with them, and then went hiking. And I love Vancouver. I would live in Vancouver. I really do like it there.
Yeah, I really like it too. I used to, in another lifetime, I was a cruise director on cruise ships. And so I got to see a lot of the best. Good thing you got
out of that.
Yeah, no kidding, right? There were I got to see the best port cities in the world, and every place I landed, I'm like, no, I still like Vancouver better. I really like it here.
It's pretty good weather. I mean, obviously it's a bit rainy, but
yeah, it's better than the part of Canada I was born, which is freezing, Kitchener, Ontario. I prefer the mild, wet weathers to the cold, icy ones.
Yeah, I'm from Michigan. So
yeah, so same difference. Yeah. Where do you live now? Austin?
No, I'm in Miami. Oh,
nice. Wow.
Right now. I was in Oakland for 10 months. I was in New York for 2 years before that. I lived in Thailand, Chiang Mai for a little bit. I lived in Turkey, Izmir for a little bit.
Nice.
I've been gypsying my entire 20s, and now I'm about to turn 30, and it feels serious.
Serious.
I'm thinking about I like LA. I like Topanga in LA.
Yeah.
Which is sort of the mountain era or Malibu.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at either moving there or do you know Ian Michael?
Yeah, I do. I love Ian Michael.
Isn't he great? Ian Michael.
Yes.
I
spoke to him yesterday and the day before.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So he's part of the Canadian. Yeah, he's part of the Canadian Psychedelic Association that we've been building.
That's right. Yeah. So I've been talking a lot with Ian Michael, and I'm really excited about what he's building in Costa Rica. And I'm actually going to have him on the podcast as well to talk about it. And I think that to me feels indicated. It almost feels like what I love about the future of living. It's like I'd love to just co-own 3 places in 3 places. Or 3 places in 3 countries. And that way you have optionality.
Yeah, no kidding.
Optionality. I prefer the word optionality.
Words.
Optionality. Because for example, I was looking at French chateaus in Bordeaux. right? And
Mm-hmm.
you can buy a really nice French chateau for 2 million euros. And if you get 10 other friends to do that with you,
Mm-hmm.
then you spend a year like working on it, investing in it, building it, renovating it, like putting a lot of like building a farm, a garden, and then like someone sticks around, 4 or 6 people stick around for the year, and then they run it like a woofing thing, and then you're making
Yeah,
food, and like you said, up permaculture. And I feel like there's a way to like help build that sort of resilience, and sort of like people want to get back to the land. I think now more than ever, cities in a post-COVID world are not going to be great places to
I
live.
know. I feel that big time. I was feeling the call to the land before as well, and thankfully, there's a lot of places near Vancouver that you can get to that you can still access the city if you need to, but you're still a world away. Like a lot of the islands just off the coast of Vancouver. I've been looking at Salt Spring Island pretty closely, or going up to the Sunshine Coast, which is still separated by a whole bunch of water. But if you need to get in the city, you can still get in the city pretty quick. But I think, yeah, I think there's going to be a large push towards people wanting to, secure food, have a garden, not be reliant on the whole system, because the system's going crazy.
And then we have psychedelics.
And then we have psychedelics, the great reset button.
Yeah. Yeah, the DMN reset, right? Everyone's just
Yeah,
the default mode network just fucking right now.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, man.
Isn't it exactly what the world needs, though? I've actually, as soon as COVID started, I was moving towards giving myself some medicine anyway, and I'm really glad I did. It was just this beautiful experience that kind of said, "Well, you've kind of been expecting something like this, haven't you? And you've largely been preparing for something like this, so and just go with it, just ride it out." And it's actually been I think it's been a fairly enlightening experience overall for me.
Yeah, I had right before COVID, I had a 3 gram mushroom trip, Golden
Nice.
Teachers.
Nice.
And sort of like a big part of my trip was sort of this impending like COVID is coming, COVID is coming, COVID is coming. And I remember like the thing that kept popping up for me was like, at least I have elderberry syrup, because
You're right.
elderberry syrup is like highly. So I was like, I got my elderberry syrup.
Yeah.
Like we're drinking that every day.
Yeah.
And it was almost like we were just, I could tell, I could see indicators in my life that I wasn't aware of until I did the mushrooms, where I was like, oh, I was subconsciously aware that this was happening. And so look at what
Yeah.
I've been doing
Me
to
too.
prepare myself for it,
Me too. Another way that happened for me is I have been working with high dose vitamin C to help people get off opioids. Since I haven't been able to actively work with ibogaine up here in the last couple of years, a lot of people still get in touch with me looking for ways to detox. And a physician friend of mine, actually Paul Stamets' partner, to be honest, she said, "Have you heard of high dose vitamin C to detox people?" And I had heard of it years ago, but hadn't really dug in. So she sent me some research on it, and I started working with it with people, and it's incredibly effective. And in the meantime, I started doing a deep dive onto vitamin C in general, and I'm like, wow, I should really be taking this. So I've been mega dosing vitamin C for 5 months before COVID hit. Like, wow, I'm not really worried about catching this virus. My immune system is better than it's been my whole life right now. So it's
Were you
wild.
just drinking glasses and glasses of orange juice? Was
No,
that
basically, so sodium ascorbate is
uh,
a buffered version of vitamin C, so it's easy on your stomach. And I was taking anywhere from 2 to 4 grams of that every couple hours while I was awake, while I am awake. I've now
did you
switched to
inject
a
it? Did you inject it?
no, just drank it.
You just swallow pills.
Yeah, well, it's a powder, so I just mix the powder into water and
Um,
neck it back.
Interesting. I did that with
Yeah,
turmeric in college, where
nice.
I had a injury. I played soccer and I was injured, and so to help with the inflammation, my dad was like, "Just take a fucking tablespoon of turmeric
Wow.
and put it in water and just chug it down." So I
Yeah.
did it. I don't know how useful it actually was. I think it helped a little bit, but
Yeah.
I can imagine with something like vitamin C, it has a certain sort of tangy. Well, I mean, what does that taste
Mhm.
like?
Yeah,
What
well,
is it?
it's sodium ascorbate, so it's been buffered with salt, so it's a little bit salty. It's almost like a very mild baking soda.
Does it taste
But
better or worse than MDMA?
Way better. Not that I know that.
Right, of course. Yeah.
Way better than Iboga, way better than ayahuasca.
Okay.
I'll drink it all day.
There we go. Yeah. I've been getting into athletic greens lately. Have you tried athletic greens?
I used to take the Greens Plus in water years ago. Is it similar? I haven't heard of athletic greens specifically, I don't think.
Yeah, it's a supplement. It has like a bunch of vitamins and minerals and nutrients and like sort of this complete thing. And you take a little bit with creatine and collagen protein. I've been getting into some crazy biohacking sort of things.
Nice.
Like with all my time in COVID, I've been like fasting and then going for long bike rides and like microdosing and trying new diets and doing jujitsu. And it's just like there's so many things. There's so much fun sort of things that you can tweak when you're in quarantine. It's a bit of a good way to stay active. I things were getting a little monotonous for a little bit. I mean, how has quarantine been in Vancouver?
It's been fine. It's amazingly, as soon as the apocalypse hit, we just started getting the best weather ever. So it's been sunny and beautiful. And, I still walk my dogs every day. It hasn't been total lockdown here. There is social distancing. A lot of shops are shut down, of course. The streets are a lot less busy. But people are getting out, and it seems like our numbers are way down right now. And as I've been telling people, I have a bit of a public-facing personality in some aspects of my life, but I'm largely a hermit. Like I spend a lot of time at home with my partner, and I have some roommates who are pretty cool. So it wasn't that big a stretch to say you need to stay at home, because that's kind of how my life has been for the last few years anyway.
Yeah, same. A lot of us sort of, work from home people and kind of set our own schedule. And to me, this is just like, oh, finally, everyone else understands how I feel.
Yeah, right. I'm glad a lot of people got a few minutes to step out of the rat race. Like, imagine you've been, on that hamster wheel for the last 30 years and you're finally getting a break. I just hope. Unfortunately, I don't know if a lot of those people are mentally prepared to step off the hamster wheel. I saw a funny meme as all this started happening. It said something along the lines of, "Y'all have not been emotionally preparing for the apocalypse, and it shows." Whereas me and all my friends, we're all kind of just, it's fun. Well, sure, we'll try and make sure we don't spread this virus in any way, but we're kind of cool with hanging out at home and doing the personal development and self-growth and meditation that we've been doing anyway.
Right. Yeah. And I think building resilience and becoming, more integrated and understanding how to use resources. And I think there's a lot, like, I've been doing psychedelics like 10 years now. So there's a lot of inner work in that process, right? Inner listening and sort of going inwards in that process. And I think that's the opportunity a lot of people are going through right now with COVID. And to be honest, it's very challenging to do, to go from externally focused to be internally focused, because the internal world is so much more chaotic and unknown. And I think that's sort of why the fear button, everyone's hitting the fear and panic button right now, because there's a lot of unknown and we're not good at dealing with that. We're not good at dealing with the chaos and the uncertainty. It's difficult. And
the media is not helping.
It's a frenzy.
The frenzy.
On our amygdala. A frenzy on our amygdala.
Yeah. And
which
now
is why MDMA is great.
It is, yeah. Shut down that default mode network for a few minutes. Yeah.
So tell me, how has this, affected psychedelics in Canada? Where were psychedelics at before COVID? How is that changing now? Is it changing? What's sort of the status there?
Well, I think it'll be difficult to say now where it is going, but here in Canada, I think it's a flourishing community and ecosystem, to the point where a lot of commercial entities are getting involved. I'm not sure that is all good news at all, but I think a lot of those players are still moving forward. We have launched a decriminalization petition here in Canada, and this is tied to the launch of the Canadian Psychedelic Association, which we just launched at the beginning of the year. But we've got a e-petition system in Canada that actually has some teeth. It's a federally sponsored petition, and it's meaning if you get enough signatures, only 500 signatures, it actually gets read in the House of Commons of our parliament. So the government then must respond. So we launched a petition towards decriminalizing plant medicine specifically. And I was kind of brought in at the 11th hour on this project. There were a couple of guys, Chris Bennett and Jovian Francie, who were working on this. And they had found a member of parliament, a Green Party MP, Paul Manley, to sponsor it, who is plant medicine friendly. And this team had seen what I'd done with a local motion in Vancouver that was against psilocybin and specifically, and we got that motion shot down last year. So they asked if I would kind of quarterback this one.
Wasn't that the Dana Larson thing?
Yeah, that was the Dana Larson thing. He said he was going to
Dana for the podcast.
Have you had Dana on here?
Yeah, I like Dana. When I was in Vancouver last, we sat down and we did an in-person podcast, and he's got balls.
Nice. Yeah, he does. He doesn't mind pushing that envelope at all. So we had that motion shot down, and then these guys asked if I would quarterback this one. I said, sure. And then this was right around COVID. So we were aiming to launch this petition on April 1st, but COVID was going on, and we said, let's just hold back on this. And we thought we were going to hold back for a while, but then it kind of just dawned on me, well, everybody's sitting at home anyway. Let's give them something to do on their computer that is a little bit hopeful. So like I say, all we needed was 500 signatures on this thing in order to get read in the House of Commons. We got those 500 signatures within 12 hours, 1,001 signatures within 24 hours. It's sitting just over 4,200 right now, and we launched it on April 16th. But we're really aiming for many, many more signatures than that, because they take the number of signatures it gets very seriously. The government is, every time you write in a letter here in Canada, they're tracking what you write that letter about. So cannabis got legalized here a couple of years ago, and that's cool. And the only reason the government actually got behind that is when 51% of Canadians polled started saying that they were in favor of cannabis legalization. That's when they got behind it, because they knew it wouldn't hurt their chances of getting reelected anymore. So if we can show that people are really serious about wanting to decriminalize plant medicines overall, I think there's a really good chance of making that happen in today's political climate. There's the petition's available at decriminalizenature.ca/petition if you've got any Canadians listening.
Great. We'll get that out. How is it different than the Decriminalize Nature campaign?
Well, when we were fighting against the City Hall motion, I am friends with at least one person within that Decriminalize Nature campaign that started in Oakland, and another friend of mine here in Canada, Salome Tabrizi, who got behind this City Hall motion as well, got against this motion. She reached out to some friends that she knew within Decriminalize Nature, and we just basically wanted to use the name and hoped to align with them at least in some small way. So they are aware that we're using the name. And other than that, we're not really affiliated. But the difference is the Decriminalize Nature campaign in the States is really focused on municipal action, whereas we're focused on federal action. If we're successful, then we've actually decriminalized plant medicines for all of Canada, would be the big difference.
Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
Did the Inuits use plant medicines?
I haven't
You know?
heard anything about the Inuits using plant medicine. I'll tell you, there's a few different trains of thought on this. For one, I've spoken at length with Paul Stamets on this actually, and he has said that a lot of the Indigenous people that he's spoken to in North America, they tend to say, we didn't really use the mushrooms all that much historically. It was the hippies that introduced them to us. And he said another component to that is the psilocybin mushrooms are actually, the spores are generally contained within wood. So it was only once massive logging started that these mushrooms were released. So I have heard that on one hand. I actually just spoke to an indigenous gentleman 2 nights ago and told him that story. And he goes, he said that he knows of a historical use of mushrooms within the Lillooet area of British Columbia, which is just north of Vancouver here. And then I was speaking to somebody who's tied to the Dena tribe in Ross River, which is in the Yukon. And I heard from them, so that's pretty far out. That's not quite Inuit territory, but that's getting up there. And he said that they have a psychedelic that that they have managed to keep hidden from the Western world entirely. What? And he said, yeah, like he says that there's some kind of an unknown to us psychedelic that they hold very sacred. So he says, if I keep playing my cards right, I might get to try that one day. But that's all I know about that. But I'm very fascinated by that.
Well, there's been some interesting news coming out lately about I think there was a lichen that was psychedelic that was found in South America. And it wouldn't surprise me if we only have sort of a, I would say, not complete understanding of the actual psychoactive plant medicines. I think it was Richard Evans Schultz who wrote the book Plants of the Gods. And that's a pretty thorough compendium of, medicines that are psychotropic in nature. And there's probably a lot that we just don't know about yet, or that maybe are still hidden from us. That's part of what fascinates me so much about psychedelics generally is the mystery that surrounds them.
Like I had LSD for the first time when I was 14 years old. It was around, and
Did you microdose?
No, I didn't microdose then. My first hit was just half a hit, but I wouldn't call it a micro. I was microdosing before it was cool too, though. In the early 2000s, I took one Hawaiian baby wood rose seed on the way to work one day, and that contains a bit of LSA. Normally you'd take about 6 to have a trip, but I'm like, oh, maybe I'll take one of these on the way to work. And then that was my first microdose experience. I'm like, wow, this is awesome. I could do this. So I continued to do that and just take a little medicine on the way to work. But yeah, my early experience was with LSD. I had no idea it was therapeutic, although I remember saying to my friends, this is what adults have forgotten that has made the world so screwed up. So something in me definitely saw the therapeutic value, but I had never heard of DMT until about the early 2000s, 2001. The same day that it came on my radar through Airwood, it came into my hands through bumping into somebody who said, I've got some DMT. Do you want to trade what I had for it? And yeah, like to have had psychedelic experiences and then to have that smokable DMT experience for the first time, like, oh my God, I had no idea that this could go in that direction. Now that's a true psychedelic. The mystery is definitely enticing.
Did you see entities?
No, that first DMT experience, I think it was actually 5-MeO DMT in hindsight, because we used so little of it. I remember us just using the smallest little bit. He said just use a few grains of salt is how he described how we should use it. And I inhaled it. All of a sudden I felt complete awareness of every cell in my body. And then I could feel that every cell in my body aware of me being aware of it. And then that awareness kind of exploded to the whole universe. And I could just sense every aspect of the universe aware of me being aware of it, and this interplay of energy. There was this kind of a presence guiding it, and seemed to indicate that every sound I was hearing, every sight I'd ever seen was sent to me almost like a FedEx package with that much intent behind it. Like the present was literally pre-sent. And then the present seemed to indicate that I felt like I was in the cradle of creation, and it was saying, like, you are Christ, you are Buddha, you are the one child of the universe, but paradoxically, so is everybody else. And then my ego kind of came back into play and said, well, what does this all mean? And this presence seemed to, it indicated that it's perfect. You can't mess it up. even your ideas of imperfection come from a bed of perfection that needs to be there before anything else can happen. And then I'm like, all right, great. Can I go back to normal now? And then the presence kind of said, yes, but this is your heritage. This is what you're trying to work back to with all your spiritual practices, which I was into even then. And seemed to indicate that this is the state of mind that you're working back to and trying to work to without the use of these substances. So I kind of consciousness returned to my body. I got up and I started jumping for joy in some way. I don't think I've ever stopped jumping for joy. I feel like that really lifted the veil in a very profound way for me that has steered my life ever since.
Well, I love the analogy of the mountaintop and the clouds clearing
Mm-hmm.
from the mountaintop, right? And so there's a
Mm-hmm.
sense of seeing what the top looks like, right? And then of course, oftentimes after we have even, really beautiful, intense psychedelic experiences, you still gotta keep walking. It's like Ram Dass, I think his quote is, "We're all just walking each other home."
Mm-hmm.
And it's a journey, and you need patience, and we get distracted by things, and living in a dual world is fun, but it comes with suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and that's also fun. So yeah, I love existentialism. I've been reading Kierkegaard and
Mm-hmm.
Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and a few others.
Nice.
And to me, the question of why, in terms of why do we exist,
Mm-hmm.
what is existence about, I always sort of like, in some ways I resonate with these Western thinkers like Walden and Tolstoy and Gandhi and, like I said, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer. So there's something about the Western philosophy that resonates with me, right? So
Mm-hmm.
and that's like the individual, and then of course we have the more collective way of being. The more, I would say, Nietzsche talked about active nihilism versus passive nihilism,
Mm.
and the sense that there's no meaning in the world, but we go out and we can create it. I think there's an element of freedom there, and in a way, that's what psychedelics can help do, right? They help us to manifest. They help us to, if we have an intention, to create that, to become it. That's what's so great about them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this sort of trick of the universe that collectively, that none of it really matters.
Yeah, it is really a big cosmic joke.
And that is the cosmic joke, right? And
Yeah.
and life happens in between those polarities. The big part of the developmental process and the process of becoming is expanding those polarities. So there's more energy
Mhm.
within the polarities to play with, and that's expansion, essentially.
Yeah, I love that. Have you dug into A Course in Miracles at all?
I have. I read Disappearance of the Universe by Gary
Oh,
Renard,
nice, nice. Yeah.
and I had a close friend of mine who recommended it. And it was it's very interesting. I resonated with a lot of it. I haven't gone through the Course in Miracles, so
Mhm.
I haven't completed that. Have you tried that? Have you done that?
Yeah, like I've been studying that for years and years. It really resonated with me because I grew up in the United Church of Canada, which is kind of the most liberal mainstream church in Canada. We were the first with gay ministers and officiating gay weddings. So it was easy thing to swallow up until a point. And then in my late teens, I'm like, why are all these adults believing this fairy tale essentially? And I kind of set it all on the back burner until I rediscovered spirituality in another way. And then when I came to the Course in Miracles, I just really liked the way that it seems to put Christianity in a whole new context. It really flips it on its head, but put it in a context that made a lot of sense to me. So I've been, I like Disappearance of the Universe a lot. The teachings of Ken Wapnick, both of those really helped me understand the Course a lot better. The biggest thing I did for myself was got the audiobook of A Course in Miracles, because it's pretty dense, as you know. So if you can just have it playing so that you don't get caught up on every freaking sentence, then it allows you to take it in a lot more. So I think I've been through the text itself probably 6 or 7 times in total, and I've done the course itself a bunch of times. But I really find that like ayahuasca as an example, the first time I took ayahuasca, I really felt like it was showing me experientially what A Course in Miracles was trying to show me intellectually. A Course in Miracles essentially says that we are asleep in heaven, perfectly at home in God, yet dreaming of exile. And I always really like that. And the way it talks about how if your kid was having a nightmare, how would you wake them up? Well, you wouldn't shake them and say, hey, get up, get up. It's only a nightmare, because that might scare them worse. Nor would you go into their dream and say, hey, look out for that monster, because that monster is going to become more real to them then. What you would do is you would gently say, hey, it's just a dream. Wake up, wake up. And it talks about how we've got two voices in our head, the voice of the ego, and then the voice that it describes as the voice of the Holy Spirit, which is just really a reflection of that remembrance that, you don't need to take everything quite so seriously. It is very dreamlike. Come on this way, turn back this way. And yeah, I found it very, very good context from which to operate my Western mind as well. Logically, it's incredibly sound, the whole course. I really like it a lot.
Have you drank ayahuasca? Well, yeah, let's talk about that. You can't just drop a line like that.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
My first time taking ayahuasca was probably 6 or 7 years ago now. And it was interesting. I'm staring at the book Autobiography of a Yogi, and this is almost two stories in one. I never really liked the idea of a guru. My Western mind wasn't really appealed to that when I kind of started on my spiritual path in my early 20s. But then I read in Autobiography of a Yogi this moment across this crowded marketplace where, after seeking him for a long time, the 14-year-old author of the book, later called Yogananda, sees his guru across the crowded marketplace. His guru sees him, and instantly they know each other. They give each other a hug, and this rest of the story unfolds. But I read that and I'm like, well, I'd be open to a guru if that happened. If I had this across the marketplace moment where every cell in my being said, this is your guy, I'd be open to that. So the very next day I walked into a Bikram yoga studio and I saw a picture of Yogananda on the wall and his lineage. And I said, well, isn't that a neat coincidence? And through my relationships that grew out of that yoga studio, I found somebody who was doing work with ayahuasca and knew some ayahuasqueros. And the ayahuasquero that I first worked with was Dave, who has been featured in numerous documentaries now. He's the one that works quite a lot with Gabor Mate, or has in the past. So my first experience with ayahuasca, it was kind of, the big thing that came out of that is the power that cannabis had over my life kind of broke after that. I was supposed to stop smoking weed for a week or so before, I think 3 weeks before the ayahuasca ceremony. I didn't make that happen. But then during the ceremony, I just felt heavy from it. And I asked the ayahuasquero afterwards, I'm like, what about cannabis? And he goes, well, I've never been a big fan of it personally. And working with people in BC, I meet a lot of people who use cannabis. And he said the things that I think I know about it are that it's sticky and that it's seductive. And as soon as I heard those two words, I'm like, yeah, that's what's going on with me in that. I'm getting stuck and I'm getting seduced by it. So it was almost like through knowing my enemy, I was able to stop using cannabis. And I stopped for about 6 months, and never since then has cannabis had really the same power over me. The next few times I did ayahuasca, almost the next 10.
Can we stop there? Can we stop there for a second, go into that? Because there are probably a lot of people on the podcast who resonate with that. I certainly resonate with that. I've had an on and off relationship with cannabis. And right now it's less on, although I take a tincture at night to help with anxiety and sleep during COVID. And in other areas and times, it's been fully on with vape pens, from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. That was the 3-month period, so nothing long. But like you said, it's sticky, it's seductive, and it numbs out, right?
And so I'd be curious to hear, just like, for those 6 months, what process did you go through, in terms of how did you remove it?
It really just stopped. Like that day, I just
Really?
stopped. It was a cold turkey from then on for the next 6 months. And really, ironically, is it ironic? I don't know. But when I started up again was when I started with Iboga, when I started working with Iboga, the gentleman who became my business partner, Gareth Moxie. We treated some 3 people over the course of a month, a couple of weekends in a month, to help them detox off heroin. And he was a cannabis smoker. So it was 6 months later that it kind of came back into my life through my working with this new plant medicine. And like I say, it never really had the same power. I was able to put it down when I needed to. I could pick it back up. But it's interesting, those sneaky little vape pens, they really did kind of come in full force as well. And I find that for me, one of the things that makes it relatively easy for me to stop is the diminishing returns are there pretty quickly. Like if I smoke cannabis, I get hungry, I get tired, I don't have quite the same energy and focus as I normally would like to. So I can see that pretty quick, and that turns me off enough that I can just say, all right, I'm going to take another break from this. But those vape pens, you can just take tiny little, almost microdoses with them. I wasn't finding that I was getting tired or burnt out with it at all. So I could just maintain at a higher level for quite some time. The thing I noticed with it, though, is it started, and this happens with kind of regular cannabis as well, but my short-term memory started just failing. Like I'd be in the middle of a conversation and completely forget what I was talking about. And that happened again and again and again. And I just realized, all right, it's time to set this thing down again. So now I try and kind of do it within a ceremonial context when I use it. I find that's incredibly powerful. Like if you're smoking cannabis every single day, you kind of forget about it and are numbed to the true power that plant has. But if you pack a bowl or take a big hit off the vape and then go straight into a meditative posture and just sit there for an hour or so, like it is really powerful spiritual medicine. And I love being able to leverage it that way, which I can't do when I'm using it chronically.
Or with sex.
Or with sex, yes.
I remember a close friend of mine and mentor of mine, he's like, yeah, I don't really use cannabis at all, except for sex.
Nice.
I'll save it for that. And I was like, that's a really good point, actually, because if you're not sensitized to it, or if you are sensitized to it, because you only use it sparingly, then for things like sex, it's an amazing sort of potent amplifier.
Mm-hmm. And I think, the opposite is true too. Like if you are chronically using it, it's really bad for sex. You don't feel motivated at all. You numb out completely.
It's interesting for someone like for me, I'm a bit more anxious, right? That's sort of where I'm at in my life. So I think cannabis has helped me to ground a little bit more. So instead of it making, I do sense a bit of lethargy, and I don't pick up as much after myself, and I'm not as tidy, right? It's like orderly. And it's like the numbing from emotions, I think that's what gets me. It becomes very easy just to like not feel things as much because you're constantly in this sort of, like you said, seductive cloud. There's a dark side to cannabis. I think it's obviously important that it be legalized everywhere and taxed, and like that absolutely needs to happen. And a lot of people just have to come to recognize that through that process. That doesn't mean it's necessarily good. It's better than opiates. It's better than, a lot of other medications that we currently have available. And obviously the best thing is to keep our sensitivity high, not to have to numb out things. And I think
totally.
that's actually a good, that's why psychedelics, I think you and I both have some level of optimism about, this will help with people not just numbing out, but actually going into the things that need to be dealt with and working through them rather than just bypassing them.
Big time. On that note, that's where my ayahuasca went next. Is for the next bunch of times I did ayahuasca, I just went straight into this hell realm. It was this hell realm that it was this feedback loop of suffering and pain, and to the point where at one point I called out and tried to pray for relief. And I prayed, I'm like, God, help me. And this kind of presence or voice came back and said, oh no, don't get us wrong, you are being punished. So it was like, oh no. So, and then what I learned from that is I did it again the next night and went straight back to that hell realm. But where the first night it seemed timeless, eternal, and that I was going to get stuck there forever, there was still this feeling of eternity in the second night. But there was also this remembrance that, oh, I was here last night and I broke through. I will get through this. So there was just that quiet voice that said that. And then it kept happening. And I said to the next ayahuasquero I was working with, I said, yeah, I really get stuck in this place and I can't seem to get beyond it. And he said, oh, you're coming up against the edges of your ego. Just meditate, bear witness to it, and you should go beyond it. So I did actually go beyond it by using that advice that night. But then the next couple times I did ayahuasca, same thing. I went into this horrible place. And like I say, it felt as though what I was being shown that A Course in Miracles was true. But from this dark place, I'm like, if A Course in Miracles say we need to wake up from this dream, I don't want to. I don't want to see what horrible entity is keeping me down like this. I want to stay asleep in my comfortable bubble if it means waking up to see what's actually making me suffer like this. And it was actually through a Santo Daime ceremony. So ayahuasca in kind of a church setting in the daytime. It's a Portuguese ceremony. It's pretty cool actually doing it in the daytime like that. And I still hit this hell realm. Then I got home that evening and I actually took a small puff off the cannabis vape pen, and I realized something. And within A Course in Miracles, it talks about the laws of chaos. And the laws of chaos is really the laws of the ego. And they're completely meaningless. And they're purposefully meaningless. And to try and find meaning in meaninglessness is what I was doing in this hell realm. So I realized, wait a second,
Sounds
I wasn't
stressful.
it was so stressful. I realized I wasn't coming up to the end of the story in A Course in Miracles, which is supposed to be a happy ending. I was just bumping up against the laws of chaos. And the other thing that happened and seemed to happen every time I was stuck in this hell realm in ayahuasca is there was always this voice after that first time. And the voice said, you snapped through this last time, you're going to be okay. When it happened in the Santo Daime church that first day, the day before I had been in the mountains north of Vancouver in Pemberton in this beautiful mountain valley with my dogs. And I'm like, yeah, but there's that mountain valley too. Like this isn't the full picture. And I realized this evening, I'm like, oh my God, that's the voice of the Holy Spirit that A Course in Miracles is trying to point out. And I was listening to the voice of the ego. So the voice of the ego was that horrible, hellish, you are a measly little piece of suffering. And the voice of the Holy Spirit was that voice that just kept saying, no, this isn't the full story. There's something beyond this. There is that valley in Pemberton that you were in. And it was such a relief. And I went into the next Santo Daime ceremony the next day, and it was still hard physically. There was a lot of purging and detoxing that happened, but I did it joyously. I was able to just completely listen to that calm, still voice that's always there, although it's harder to hear because the ego speaks English and speaks it loudly and speaks it first. But it was just a beautiful lesson for me that I got out of ayahuasca in that regard. And I haven't gone back to it since that, actually, which was probably a couple years ago. But maybe I feel a call to do it again after all this chatting about it.
I have a tangential question,
Yeah.
which I think will... How do you define humility?
I think just to realize that we really don't know jack shit and to kind of try and remember that in the face of it all. Like, as a whole species of mankind, none of us can accurately describe or recreate so that it's functional a single blade of grass. So I think just to remember that piece of knowing, like the oracle at Delphi in ancient Greek times, supposedly they asked who is the wisest person in all of Greece, and it responded that Socrates was. And then they asked Socrates about it, and he goes, well, the one thing I know is that I know nothing. So I think that's humility, is to kind of keep in mind that even your best guesses are just that. They're best guesses. And maybe this is tangential itself, but there's something around selfishness versus altruism. The reason I came on this path to a large degree is I started reading a lot of books. I stopped halfway through some of these books and said, well, what am I after here? Well, I'm after happiness. And then I said, well, let's cut to the chase, like Tim Ferriss's minimum effective dose. Well, what do all these books say about happiness then? And the answer came back that the happiest people, or at least the people I most wanted to emulate, seem to be helping a heck of a lot more people than I was. And I didn't like that answer at the time. I was a hotel manager at the time. I figured that was my goal. I was really ego-oriented and just had this certain path in mind and didn't really feel myself to be a social worker type at all. But at the same time, I felt it was a pretty valuable hypothesis, and potentially valuable anyway, a fairly sound hypothesis. So I started looking at different ways that I could give back, and I turned my attention to Vancouver's downtown east side. And long story short, about 10 years later, Ibogaine came on the radar as a way to potentially help that neighborhood. My business Liberty Route got started. We've treated over 200 people using Ibogaine, mostly for opiate use disorder. But through that process, to myself anyway, I proved that hypothesis was correct. There's really nothing that feels as good as truly helping a person to transform and make a better life for themselves. And the texts and emails that I get at Christmas really stoke that fire for sure. For me, what that says is that if you're doing selfishness right, if you take it all the way to the nth degree, it kind of turns in on itself and becomes altruism. And
this is a great point. It's like the Ouroboros.
The what?
The Ouroboros.
I don't know that.
It's the snake eating its own tail.
Yes. It's true. And we were talking earlier about the different philosophers and the kind of collectivism versus the individualism. Another great metaphor is the eagle meets the condor, and the eagle is that sharp Western way of being. The condor is that more indigenous community way of being. And it really speaks to the politics of the age as well, where the right wing is really fiercely individual. The left wing is worried about the collective. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, well, what's the solution to this? Where do those two things meet? And I think it meets at the sharp individual is super powerful, and we need to honor that sharp individual. And I love the word sharp around this description, because sharp can cut things and destroy them, or sharp can create things. So to honor the sharp individual. And what does the left wing say? What does the condor say? And why are social justice warriors kind of freaking out perpetually? It's because people keep getting left behind. We got to stop leaving people behind. So if you can take those two things and meld them together, and I think you can, because the whole reason the left is saying we can't leave people behind is because they too value that single sharp individual. And I think if you can get that sharp individualism to focus on the whole, which is what I have done with my life to a certain small degree, I think that really is an answer, and it's very satisfying. I really like Ayn Rand's writing and her philosophies to get a better idea of the sharp individual, books like Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. I don't subscribe to her philosophy entirely, because if in that book it talks about, Atlas Shrugged is John Galt, and John Galt's almost like a Christ-like figure, but he's very selfish and just wants to let the rest of the world fall apart so he can be who he is. And I always thought, if you can take a person like John Galt with that genius and have them focus on the solutions that would lift up the whole world, that's the answer, in my opinion.
Well, that's interdependence,
Mm-hmm.
And that's the integration of the individual and the collective. And I think, one philosophy I've been getting into lately is meta-modern philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we have modernism, which is like the world, United States up to the 1960s, we have postmodernism, which is Foucault and Chomsky and psychedelics and, academia. And then after postmodernism is meta-modernism. And it's sort of built, one of the fundamental kind of principles is integral models, much of which Ken Wilber has developed in terms of like, what does it look like to create integral models in culture and business? And I think that to me is that strong sense of interdependence where you have both the sharp individual and you have a larger collective greater good. That's really, if we look at the best example in the world today, it's the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Germany to some degree, the Netherlands, Belgium, there may be a handful of others. And those models of sort of green social liberalism, or I forget the exact term, but I think those are healthy, sustainable models for nation states that are of that size and of that ilk, if you will. They're fairly homogenous and, there are a number of other benefits. How do you apply that model to the United States? Or how do you apply that model to, Canada? I think in particular for the United States, that's more difficult. But I think the only way, as we were saying earlier, the only way out is through. And the only way out for the United States is to either reform the collective or disintegrate and allow states like California and New York and, like give up a lot of its power. And I think that will be the big sort of tension of the 2020s is nation states starting to lose power because the federal government is not responsive enough in the United States. And it's not really representative of where we're going. It's representative of where we were, but not where we're going necessarily. So.
Beautiful. Yeah, I hope there's a solution. I think it does lie someplace in that idea of it feels really good to help people and to support people. One of the big epiphany moments in my life was in 2005. I had sold some stock options in a company I worked for at a good time, made a good mittful of money, and I had headed down to Costa Rica to learn how to surf and did that. And it was my plan to stay there for a long time. I have a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, so I figured I'd be able to make a modest living down there, no problem. And I planned on staying down there a long time. And my goal up until this point, and this probably would have been early 30s, was I just wanted to come to a place where I could do nothing if I wanted to do nothing. Like I just didn't want to be forced into work or anything. So I felt like I finally got that in Costa Rica. On one day, I was reading Wade Davis's One River, which is an awesome book I highly recommend for people that like plant medicines. And you mentioned Richard Evans Schultes. It's all about him. And I just smoked a little bit of a joint and I'm sitting in a hammock. And I put the joint down, I put the book down, and I really slipped into this beautiful state of unity consciousness. Like it was this next level, transcendent state where I just felt at one with everything. And I knew I'd finally achieved what I wanted up until this point in life. And I was sitting there and it was glorious. And then into that state crept an idea that said, you're not going to really be able to enjoy this until you help more people get here. And I was just like, I knew that was right. And I kind of packed up within the next couple of weeks and came back to Vancouver and started focusing on the downtown east side again. And I think that is within all of us. I think for all the striving that you're doing for material success, that striving, I think if you do it right, is eventually going to lead you to seek something a little bit deeper and a little bit more meaningful. And then once you find that deeper and meaningful, you want to help other people get there. I find that with psychedelics as well. In people that have beautiful, transformative experience with plant medicines, almost to the person, they then want to make sure that other people feel that transformation as well. I have a lot of hope for the world. I think
it's like a virus.
It is like a virus. It's like a meme. It's this positive idea virus that once it takes hold, you just want to spread it.
You just want to spread it. Well, that's beautiful in a very non-beautiful way, because obviously with what's going on with COVID. But
right.
These medicines are transformative. The insight they provide is incredibly important. And we're really in the process of sort of rebuilding society to be more of a listening society. Mm-hmm. And I feel like psychedelics will be imperative in that process. So Trevor, thanks for joining us. It was a fun hour. Before we go, any last sort of links, URLs, websites that people, especially for the decrim measure?
For sure. Some cool things I'm involved in are, again, that decriminalization petition. So decriminalizenature.ca/petition. We have also started the Canadian Psychedelic Association, which we really want to be one umbrella here in the Great White North, where people can come together and talk about some of the unique challenges and issues that come up when working with these plant medicines. So that's psychedelicassociation.net. And we've got a Friends of the CPA package that you can buy that gives you a whole bunch of discounts for some of the psychedelic conferences that we've got, and also helps you support what we're up to. We've got a lot of really cool webinars that are happening through the CPA. Dennis McKenna and Wade Davis were on our first one. The next one we're doing is next Thursday. I don't know when this is going to air, but next Thursday, where I'm sitting right now, is a week today. So Thursday the 14th, I'm going to be interviewing Adrianne Robson. And Adrianne was featured in a really cool documentary that people should see if they haven't yet, called Dosed. And you can go to dosedmovie.com to watch that documentary. I'm featured in that movie as well. And it's the story of Adrianne using these plant medicines to try and overcome her heroin addiction. So super powerful. And then I'm also the chair of the board for MAPS Canada. So MAPS in the US and in Canada are organizations that need everybody's support. So please check out mapscanada.org as well.
It was a pleasure, Trevor. Thanks so much for coming on. We'll make sure, listeners, that we get those links in the show notes as well if you want to access them later. And, very optimistic about the initiatives that you have undergoing, especially the Decrim initiative, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks, man. And congrats to you. You mentioned at the start you're just turning 30. You've accomplished a lot in that time. So please keep up the good work. The world needs it.
Thank you, Trevor. Thanks
a lot, Paul. Take care, man.
You too.